Who has ever had someone tell you you'd like to fail? I'd like to fail. You ever have someone come up to you and say, you know what, I'd like to fail? Have you ever had that experience? I haven't either. What's interesting, though, is that if you believe, as I think most of us do in people, why do people then not achieve their potential, right? It was kind of an interesting thing. So I had this aha moment when I was in my last corporate role, and I took 6 months, and so what I did is I looked into every time somebody didn't do what I expected them to do, that I was involved with, I dug into it and found out why. Guess what I found out? I found out most of the time, almost all of the time, 99% of the time, it was because of my failure to communicate appropriately in terms of what I expected done. So that was kind of an aha moment for me, because I thought to myself, well, I guess maybe I need to improve how I do things. Excuse me, I forgot one little thing. Clicker doesn't work without having the... So you've probably heard this expression about herding salespeople. They're like cats. So unless you've really worked with a bunch of salespeople, in this case there was 100 of them, salespeople are incredible at coming up with reasons why things don't work out. They're incredible. So when you're supervising 100 salespeople over a 4-state area, they were really good at figuring out why things wouldn't work out. So I needed to get really good at communicating with them so that I could hold them accountable. But it was a very interesting learning experience, but they truly are like herding cats. So I think it's safe to say that potential is something that we would all like to achieve our own potential. Here's a real simple version of that. You know, if we do the things that are on this list, if we have the systems, if we have the habits, if we have self-discipline, if we develop relationships, if we have happy customers, likely if we do these things, it's pretty assured that we are going to be pretty satisfied with our results. What I've always found intriguing, though, Earl Nightingale is kind of one of the most interesting persons I've ever read about. It is so incredible when you think about the fact that the people in this room are achieving somewhere between 1 and 5% of our potential, which leaves about 95% untapped potential for everybody in this room, of course, including myself. So I deal a lot with what I call the gap between where you think you are and where you'd like to be. So if we have a results gap, here's some ideas on what to do about it. In December, we talked about the importance, E for E here, if you were here, we talked about the importance of being systematic, right, about how we go about doing things. Because when you have systems, it allows you to customize what you do. If you don't have systems, then everything is a fire drill. So we talked about that in December. And then in January, my wife Ann talked about accountability, and I have to read this because I can't possibly say it as well as she did. But Ann talked about accountability as a preemptive tool, a systematic approach to planning and executing on the things necessary to accomplish the desired results. So obviously I was impressed with that enough that I wrote it down and I wanted to share it with you. But in January, we talked about accountability. So how do we bridge this gap? Assuming that you're all with me, or maybe you don't have a gap, which would even be better. But if you do have a gap, here's some ideas. It's important that we know, and Stephen Covey said this better than I could possibly say, we judge ourselves by our intentions, but others judge us by our actions. So we see the world through our eyes, but everybody else sees us through a different lens. So take responsibility first. 2 things that I have found in my coaching that we tend to overlook. Number one, if you're communicating with somebody and you're setting an assignment, when is it that it's due? It's amazing to me how often we forget to tell people, can you do that by X date? I don't know why, but we kind of have a conversation, but it really isn't an assignment. So if you don't do that, I would encourage you to really get good at setting an expectation for when your expectations are that you want that done. So when we think about systems, what I think about first is, what systems am I going to use to manage myself? Because if I don't manage myself, I really can't influence other people, right? So my focus and a lot of our focus today is how can we manage ourselves and therefore be able to influence other people in a better way? So important, Dale and I were talking about this earlier today. This whole idea of the subconscious mind is becoming more and more relevant, I think, every day. I know Dale is writing about this. I know when I visit with Dan, in his practice, we talk more about this. We so underestimate the importance of the subconscious mind. When I train on this, I usually say to, and this includes like team leaders in an organization that builds cabinets, I just talk to them, do you ever drive around and you don't remember where you drove? You like 30 minutes? You ever done that? Where you drive and it's like, wow, how did I get here? And I always say to them, who do you think was driving the car, right? You weren't. Well, your subconscious mind was driving the car. So we really underestimate the value, and that's a topic of Dale's next book will cover that, and he'll be able to get you to drill down into that. So in selling, what we know is that decisions are based on emotion and then we justify them with facts. Right? People make an emotional decision to do things and then they go about justifying them with facts. So a lot of times in our selling process, we're trying to tell people all these facts. If you haven't sold them emotionally, then you're really probably not going to be successful. We all have these deep-seated beliefs inside of us that come about as a result of our life's experience, what happened to us. And so we need to understand that those beliefs are really a lot of what's driving how we behave, what we do on an everyday basis. So what we tend to overlook sometimes, if we're having a bad day, if we're having a bad week, if we're having a bad month, if we're underestimating the importance of who's planting those thoughts about how things are going, we really underestimate the importance of what's going on. So for me, I try to really be very critical of myself. If I get into a negative mode, I'm going to bring about negative thoughts. It's just sure thing. So the more we can focus on those things that are positive, the better off we are. We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence then is not an act, but a habit. Interestingly enough, though, for those of you who might be trying to change habits today, this is kind of a popular time of the year to create new habits, right? Is that habits die hard. I mean, it's not easy. We've practiced them for a long time. We've got it down now. And so to get a habit changed is not easy. And the conventional wisdom is that it takes about 28 days to change a habit. That probably is different with different people. But you have to think about and practice that habit for 28 days before it becomes anything new. But one of the things we've talked about is we tend to be in a scarcity mindset of, oh my, all these things that are going well. That's getting back to what are we planting in our mind. So we want to plant the importance of the abundance that we have in our lives, not the scarcity that we have in our lives. So Wayne Dyer, I think most of you have heard of him, says be miserable or motivate yourself. Whatever has to be done is always your choice. So if you're having a miserable day, let's not lose sight of who planted those seeds for the miserable day. It isn't the salespeople were great at this. Oh, it's prices. Oh, our products aren't right. Our services are late. All these things. The truth was, if a salesperson wasn't doing well, they planted in their mind that they weren't going to do well. I don't know if you are familiar with the concept called emotional contagion. This is a book that I came across a long time ago that I really love. But not only do then we put ourselves in this situation, but then we convey that same thing to everybody else, and then we look around and it's like everybody's really negative. Well, guess what? Why do you suppose they're really negative? They're just following after you. I remember in New Jersey when I was first assigned to an account, I looked around one day, I thought, man, everybody's negative. And then I realized, oh, I'm negative, right? I'm the problem. I changed my mindset. Almost immediately, everybody else did. It was just remarkable. So there is a psychology to winning, and I believe that it all begins with being an optimistic person. So optimism, having an optimism and having love and joy in our lives as opposed to anger and sadness and fear is really critical to our success. Who uses a standard, shift anymore? Who's got a standard car? Okay, Dr. Fazio. Okay, Steve. So interestingly enough, the rest of you I trust are probably driving a standard vehicle, right? Why is that? Other than the fact you don't know how to drive isn't it automatic, right? It's automatic. It's easier, right? It happens automatically. Well, what if we tried to do things in a more automatic way in our business? So David Allen, who I just recently started reading about, says that much of the stress that people feel doesn't come from having too much to do. It comes from not finishing what we've already started. Does that resonate with you? Right? So we tend to think of, I got all these things. It isn't about all these things we got to do. It's about all these things we started and didn't finish. So maybe we ought to just start fewer things. That might be, So how do you get automatic results? I believe it's pretty simple. You have a plan, you organize things, you prioritize things, and you complete them. And so my comment to people is, if you're having a hard time with stuff, you might just want to stop starting so many things if you don't intend to finish them. And if you aren't going to finish them, don't start them. It's a pretty simple formula. Some simple questions. Why am I doing this task? What will it create for my business? How will it rock my clients' world and thrill them? How awesome will it be when it's done? Just some real, simple, straightforward questions to ask yourself. But how does a people system improve results? This is my favorite, where I find that where people run into trouble is they don't follow this formula. Setting clear expectations, inspecting what you expect when you set the expectations, and providing for consequences. Consequences are not negative. Consequences can be positive or negative, but if you don't complete this cycle for people, they don't really seem to get it. And so this is what I got really good at when I had my sales organization. John, I know you're a fan of the 7 levels of communications. This is just another system that people use that really has been very effective. So how do we build a trust system? This is the formula that I have found to prove to be true. Trust equals consistency over time. Seems simple enough. Here are some ideas of what causes trust to be. Here's some authentic and consistent. You can read those things for yourself. But trust is a process, and I don't know that we always think about the fact that building trust with people isn't something random. It's a process that occurs. First, they get a perception. Then they realize that we have shared values and goals. And then what we say and what we do coincide with each other. The biggest place to run into trouble with trust is when there's a gap between what we say and what we do. So Richard Feynman said, the first principle, you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. This is what I call intellectual honesty. Sometimes it's not easy. It's one of the reasons why I like to surround myself with people who tell me how they see me. But we do tend to fool ourselves sometimes in terms of what's going on. So Johari said that there are things that we know about ourselves, and there are things that are not known to us. How do you figure what those things are? Is you surround yourself with people who will level with you and create an environment where they know that you want that information. There are trust levels. This is interesting to me. Sometimes we give trust freely. Some other people you have to earn trust. It's important when you're communicating with people that you know, how does that person develop trust? Here are the 5 C's of trust: concern, candor, and competence. If you don't show these 3 things, it's very hard for me to trust you. And interpersonal trust is easily damaged when we violate expectations. Expectations are disconfirmed, or we unknowingly break trust rules. But it's hard to build a relationship if you get into this area. So consistent communications, random and fat communications. Random and fat communications mean this: if you aren't clear on what you say and you're doing things in a fat way, frequently people misunderstand what our communications are. So being precise is important. Also, it's what's right that's important, not who's right. Right? When you're talking with people, don't get caught up in who said what to who. Really, what's the right thing, not who's right. Don't focus on other person's idiosyncrasies. This is something that corporate America taught me, is, how I feel about you is really irrelevant. It's not really, that's just, I have my problems, you've got yours. So I'm not going to let idiosyncrasies get in my way. Let's make sure that what I do is important and not what I know, because if those two don't jihad, then you really have a problem. So what you do and what you know have to be consistent. So become your new habits and values, be in sync. Together, everyone achieves more. When the students are ready, a teacher will appear. You may or may not want to improve your communication skills today. If you do, I'm sure you will. If you're not, then you won't. Questions do you have about communications? Dale?
Not so much a question,
Yeah.
but a comment. You had a list of 4 things, I think, that help us achieve our goals. I'd like to add one more, and that is
Yeah,
the
please.
deadline.
Yes, yeah, please.
We often do the first 4. If we do them at all, we'll do the first 4, but we won't set that deadline
Yeah.
for ourselves to do that.
Awesome.
And
What a driver that is.
yeah,
Yes, yes, thank you. Any other questions or thoughts about communications? I think sometimes we think we're all good communicators just because we do. Right? Judy?
I was going to say something similar about trust. We could be the most trustworthy person in the world, but not be really good at building trust.
Oh, great point. Thank you. Great point. Any other thoughts? Okay, just to close, we're all going to get knocked over, right? Things are going to happen. We're going to get knocked over. You have to discern and make best choices. You have the power of choice. You become what you finish. You decide what commitments you make and keep, and you are responsible and accountable for your destiny. So Karen Salmonson said, every day is a new opportunity to change your life. You have the power to say, this is not how my story ends. Just change the channel. You are in control of the clicker. Thank you so much.